Hello students, welcome to your WebSeek.Academy English channel. Today, we will discuss the poem The Farmer's Wife, which is part of your first PUC English syllabus. This poem is written by Volga, a well-known Indian poet who beautifully captures rural life and emotions through simple yet powerful language. A note on the poet. Volga is the pen name of the well-known Telugu writer P. Lalita Kumari, born 1950. She was born in Guntur, one of the big towns and educational centers in the state of Andhra Pradesh. Her stories, novels, and poetry reflect well-articulated feminist positions without compromising either the quality of the literary form or failing to represent the reality of the characters. In her poetry, a metaphor not only facilitates form but also celebrates the ideas depicted. The Farmer's Wife Summary. The poem, The Farmer's Wife, by the Volga begins with the lamentation of the farmer's wife, who laments over the death of her husband. However, in her lamentation, it is clear that more than mourning over the death of her husband, she expresses her grief over the hopelessness of the situation. Her husband has committed suicide because he was unable to face the creditors. However, his act is not considered an irresponsible act. In fact, people may even think of his act as the virtuous act of a self-respecting man who did not want to bend his head and stretch his arm. But the woman points out that, by committing suicide, he has left the woman behind, to bend her head and stretch her hand, as she has to continue to live at least for the sake of her 4 children. The woman ironically adds that bending the head and stretching the arm pose no problem to her, as she has always done that. She has always done that, as women are always pushed to the low level. But she cannot understand how her husband, who had always asserted his right over her, simply by virtue of being a man, could drink poison and get released from the worldly bonds in a cowardly way. The woman, in her questioning of his act, implies that his irresponsible act has poisoned her very existence. She suggests that when living was worse than death, embracing death was a selfish and even cruel act on the part of the man, as he had no thought for the family that he left behind. The woman is shocked that the man, who could kick and bully her with the claim of superiority over her, could give her the final death blow by committing suicide. At this point, the woman compares the hardship she suffered in the family over the years and the problem of the cotton crop being destroyed that year. She points out that the pain she had undergone was for a longer period of time, but she had withstood it. The problem of the cotton crop, as she says, is but yesterday's. The juxtaposition of the two problems is done to show that men buckle under pressure more easily than women. Men are self-centered too, and when they take recourse to escapism, they don't give any thought to what would happen to their family. They are not worried over the future of their children either. Hence it becomes double jeopardy for the woman. On the one hand, she has to come to terms with the death of her husband. On the other, she has to worry over the future of her children. Here also the poet draws an analogy between the natural crop and the children. The woman points out that when the crop failed, her husband committed suicide. If she were to do the same thing, her children wouldn't have a bright future. She adds that she is not prepared to allow the harvest of her womb to perish. She cannot leave her children helpless like the worm-eaten cotton pods in the wind. The woman rightly points out that meeting one's end is over in a moment. It's not a long struggle. But the struggle in life, for life to sustain and continue, is a long struggle, full of perils. For this, one needs a brave heart. Only the one with a firm heart will analyze the difficult situation with questions like, what of this? Or, why is this? When a person asks, what of this? He probably wonders about what the final outcome of all the struggle would be. When he asks, why is this? He definitely has a sense of self-pity. Yet he should never lose his reasoning ability and the determination to fight his misfortune. Otherwise, his children would become orphans. That is why the farmer's wife asserts that she would continue to live to teach her children how to live. She wants to instill in her children the fighting spirit which her husband lacked. That is why she says that she would continue to be alive to teach her children to fight with a clenched fist for not only the basic need of food but also more important things, attaining which might be nothing less than a battle. For this, she pledges to embrace life and not death, though life would present a long and painful struggle. The Farmer's Wife Comprehension 1. 1. Who do you and T in the poem refer to? Answer. You refers to the farmer and a refers to the farmer's wife. 2. Why has the speaker's husband committed suicide? Or, why did the farmer commit suicide? Answer. The farmer was in debt and had no crops to sell. He was unable to bear the shame and was unwilling to stretch his hand for help. Being hounded by creditors, he committed suicide. 3. What series of contrasts does the speaker draw between herself and her husband? Answer. The speaker says that her husband was virtuous, but she is a sinner, and he is dead while she is alive. There is irony in this series of contrasts because the farmer, unable to bear the shame, committed suicide without wondering what the plight of his wife would be, left behind to face the creditors. 4. What expressions in the poem bring out the contrast between the speaker and her husband's plight? What difference does this indicate? Answer. Being a man, the farmer was not used to being subservient to others. He could not bear the idea of bending his head or stretching his hand in front of the creditors. But, being a woman, the farmer's wife was used to obedience and harsh treatment and could pull on even when insulted and deprived. Moreover, being a woman, her motherly instinct made it impossible for her to leave her children behind at the mercy of fate. Though the prospect of bringing up 4 children in the face of stark poverty is daunting, she faces the challenge and doesn't take recourse to the easier escape route of suicide. Thus we see that the difference between the man and the woman lies in the way men and women are generally treated in society and the way in which men treat women at home. But the saving grace is the fact that the injustice meted out to women in society and at home makes them strong and gives them the courage to embrace life and struggle for life. 5. The farmer's wife in the poem is A. Complaining about her husband's death. B. Lamenting the death of her husband. C. Angry that her husband has left her. D. Bitter about her husband's act. E. Worried about her future. F. All of the above. Answer. F. All of the above. 6. What memories of her husband trouble her now? Or, how does the farmer's wife lament over the death of her husband? Or, what are the memories of her husband that haunt the farmer's wife? Answer. The woman was ill-treated by her husband in his drunken state. He had abused her both physically and verbally when he was alive. But all this was accepted by the woman because society had made her believe that a man had the right to rule over his wife and even abuse her when displeased, as he was the master who went out into the world while she was to deal with family problems. But this idea of the man gets beaten when the farmer is unable to withstand the pressure and commits suicide. Now, the woman has to shoulder the responsibility of both work and home. Naturally, the woman has all negative memories of the man who did no justice to her when alive and did a greater injustice to her by embracing death. The poet wants to point out that while all of us sympathize with the man who was driven to commit suicide, the plight of the woman who has to fend for herself is worse than that of the man who is dead and thereby free of all problems. 7. The poem ends with A. An assertion. B. A deep sense of failure and despondency. C. or will to survive against all odds? Answer: C, or will to survive against all odds. 8. What does the phrase, harvest of my womb, suggest? Why is their plight compared to worm-eaten cotton pod? Answer: the phrase, harvest of my womb, refers to the 4 children the woman has borne. Just as the field produces the crop and has a harvest, the woman has produced children. If she, like her husband, takes the easier way out by committing suicide, the children will be left behind like the worm-eaten cotton pod. The woman makes it clear that if the children do not have the parent figure to nourish them, they would be like the unripe cotton pods. They cannot reach their mature stage of growth. The poet deliberately uses the simile which compares the orphan children to worm-eaten cotton pod because it was in cotton-growing areas that the highest number of farmers committed suicide. 9. To what condition had her husband's act of committing suicide pushed her? Answer: her husband's act of committing suicide has pushed her to a state which is worse than death. The woman uses the word death blow to show that the death blow of poison which put an end to the farmer's life is easier than the death blow that the wife has to experience in terms of money, dignity and complexity of bringing up the children without any support. The farmer's wife comprehension too. 1. Many times the tone suggests the attitude of the speaker. What kind of attitudes are suggested by the words virtuous, poor sinner, he is but a man, what of this, why is this? Answer: the attitude of the speaker is cynical. She cannot accept her husband's act of cowardice. She uses the word virtuous ironically. She mocks at the possibility of all praising the farmer as a man of dignity who couldn't bear the idea of taking loans from others. It is customary for all of us to praise the dead, and so the farmer would get nothing but sympathy. However, the speaker considers his act cowardly. She says ironically that she will be taken as a poor sinner because she is still alive when her virtuous husband has become a martyr. She is justifiably angry that the man of the house has turned out to be a coward. The man who abused her because of his advantage of being but a man in a patriarchal society has left her behind to do the work of a man, that is, earning a living for the sake of the 4 children. The woman rightly points out that the farmer should have had the strength of character to ask the questions, what of this, and why is this, and fought against the odds in life to come out of difficulty. But he showed no such courage and left his family behind in dire straits to fend for themselves. 2. What kind of questions does the poem raise about the plight of farmers' widows? Do you think that these questions are only addressed to the speaker's dead husband? Answer: the poem, The Farmer's Wife, by the Volga takes up the contemporary problem of many a farmer committing suicide unable to repay the debt taken. It takes a refreshingly different angle of perceiving the problem from the farmer's wife's angle. The poem is an eye-opener because generally when we hear or read about the acts of suicide, we think only about the tragic plight of the farmer who was pushed into the act of committing suicide. While it is true that the state of the farmer deserves our sympathy, it is equally true that not many of us view the problem from the angle of the family that is left behind. The fact remains that the family would continue to be in the state of insolvency, and such a family would be in the worst state of affairs because the so-called man of the house is dead and the family still has no source of income. The widow of the farmer or any other person who is left behind to shoulder the onus is in a very pitiable condition indeed. Hence, the aim of the poem is not to single out one case of suicide, but to throw light on a social problem which needs government intervention to be resolved. On the one hand, the poem is a plea to all those who give up their struggle not to do so and to brave the storm courageously, and on the other hand, it is a tribute to the women who show greater forbearance than men in facing difficulty and in tackling problems. The poem also mocks at the idea of a man as the breadwinner and his sense of superiority over the woman he takes for a wife. The poem, at yet another level, is an appeal to the government and perhaps even social organizations to support those people who want to live with dignity but are forced to eat dirt. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to WebSeek.Academy for more English lessons and notes. See you in the next video. Until then, learn more and achieve more.